Welcome to week 4, everybody. This week we'll be continuing our conversations on language and etymology. We'll also be discussing the emergence of inquiry and the dispositions and qualities that will be necessary as you begin to think about carrying out your inquiry assignment. And we'll also be introduced to image and visual languages. So this week we'll be revisiting Van Manen, pages 58 to 62. We'll also be reading Gillian Rose's chapter on visual methodologies, specifically paying attention to pages 15 to 28 and how meaning is made at the sites of production, image, and audience, or at the intersection of artist, viewer, and context. So in this way, Rose is proposing that meaning is not located in the image, the photograph, video, or object, but rather it's constructed in interaction with the artist or maker's intent, the viewer's perceptions and understandings, the object, and the artifact that's being considered. So it's very much a contextual view of looking at meaning in a relational way. We'll also be reading Encounters with Materials, Chapter 3 on charcoal. And when you're reading this chapter, pay particular attention to what is meant by encounter and what this might do in inquiry. By Friday at 11:55 p.m., post a link to your portfolio entry 4, and also post to the etymological resource or sources forum, and there'll be more on this in the next few slides. By Sunday at 11:55 p.m., engage and respond to one other entry in the Portfolio Entry 4 forum, and respond to one other post in the Etymological Sources forum. And also, lastly, participate in your 1-hour virtual collaboratory and add to your Google Doc notes. So last week we began discussing what it means to pay attention and what paying attention does, especially when it's considered as an art. So we asked what might be the purpose of the word art as an adjective for noticing, and why an art of noticing? What is significance about the use of the word art in describing the act of noticing? So thinking carefully about what does the word art do here, and why is it significant, and what changes when noticing becomes artful? And I was really inspired by some of the dialogue that was going on in the group chats this week. So I'm just drawing on a few quotes. There were so many that I wanted to include, but I just picked a few because some of them lend well to our conversations this week. So Lee wrote, when the act of noticing becomes artful, the act allows us to unlearn what we've always assumed to know and to relearn with a perspective of appreciation. And I thought this was really powerful. The idea that unlearning is an act of making strange, opening space for the not yet, the what else, and the possible. Teresa wrote, in art, the process of something is so much more important than the actual product itself. When a sculptor creates something, it depends on how they glide their hands, how the clay is angled, etc. Many different factors affect the process, which in turn affects the product. However, the product is usually more thought of with regards to how something is made. For example, for any painting, one can assess the painter's preferred strokes, the preferred mediums, preferred subjects, etc. The process can never be separated from the product, and I think this is really important. She goes on to write, thus, art as an adjective for noticing entails giving importance to the act and processes of noticing. So she's speaking to the dance between process and product, not as two distinct or separate engagements, but I think I'm reading this as a process that is continually formed and reformed. So when I read this quote, I'm thinking about the art of noticing as a way of paying attention to this in-between, the in-between of these two components, process and product, and how they move together in particular ways. So not necessarily looking only at a product for a finalized account of something, but attending to its transformations. So in this way, thinking artfully is linguistically attached both to the word form as both a verb and noun. It's actively forming its form. It's always in a process of ongoing engagement. So when you're thinking about image and text in your portfolio and inquiry assignments, think about how you might attend to this in-betweenness, both in your ways of looking and noticing, but also in how you represent this noticing with image and text. And Kelly writes, when we engage in the art of noticing, we recognize the multiple perspectives constantly at play. We know that our documentation of experience is very personal and reflects our own experiences, while attempting to reflect the experiences of others. The purpose of art is to elicit a response from the viewer, and I think that by artfully noticing, we elicit responses within ourselves, and when we document these experiences, we naturally elicit a response in the reader. And this is something that we're going to be specifically talking about this week. So how an art of noticing might recognize that meaning does not exist in one place or exist within an isolated individual, but rather it's enacted in response to multiple components coming together and the effects this meeting provokes. So how might you elicit and proliferate a response to a phenomena in your work? Thinking not as a direct sharing of knowledge that's already known, or a portrayal of something from point A to point B, but as more of a provocation that draws on multiplicities of a moment and provokes multiple trajectories in its effects. So it's not only about yourself and the phenomena, but about multiple components and multiple perspectives that are constantly at play here. And I think that this is where experimenting with photography and poetics is particularly important because it allows for multiple interpretations of a phenomenon.